Chasing China.
Hello and welcome back to Chasing China. Today's episode is a very special one, a very personal one, because I'm sharing the story of one of the most life-changing days of my life, the birth of my son. And I will take you with me through my last weeks of pregnancy, the days leading up to the birth, and the moment everything started, and what it was like to welcome our baby into the world here in China. And when I was reflecting on the whole story and writing everything down, I started to realize that this wouldn't be a really short episode as promised. So there are so many things that came to my mind and that I want to share. Therefore, I divided my birth story into 4 parts. So part 1 is about the pregnancy, the preparing stuff, and about choosing China as well. Part 2 is about the day everything started, the labor and birth itself. Part 3 is about the first days in the hospital and becoming parents. And the last part is about looking back, how everything was and what I would tell to other parents. But before we start, of course, I need to add a small disclaimer. This episode is a personal birth story based on my own experiences because, every pregnancy, every birth, every mother and every baby is different. And I'm not a medical professional. I am not giving medical advice or suggesting that my experience is the right or only way to give birth. I'm simply sharing my own journey, like the things I experienced, the decisions I made, and the emotions I felt. And what giving birth in China was like for me as a German expat. And my hope is that this episode can give you an honest and personal insight into my experience. So let's start with the first part. This is the story of the day my life changed forever. Looking back at my pregnancy, I would say was definitely not easy, but at the same time, incredibly special. Physically, my pregnancy was actually quite typical, I think, but the journey itself was not always easy and enjoyable. I had nausea until my 7th month and an extreme level of exhaustion that I had never experienced before. It was a kind of tiredness that I didn't even know was possible. On top of that, I was still working in a local job here in China during the first month of my pregnancy. And honestly, that made everything much harder, especially because of the exhaustion and the Chinese working environment and everything. I already talked about it in the first season, I guess. But looking back just at the last weeks of pregnancy, they were actually really okay. It was kind of beautiful as well. The end was finally in sight. My belly was visible. Everything suddenly felt much more real. And there was something so magical about knowing that I was about to meet my baby soon and that everything is over soon. So of course I still had the typical pregnancy struggles. I had back pain in my joints. I went to physiotherapy. I even tried acupuncture for quite a while. I did a lot of yoga, still went to the gym. But still I slept badly and everything became slower and more exhausting. Even simple things felt like they took so much more effort, like putting on my shoes or my underwear or whatever. But at the same time, there was so much excitement and anticipation. My husband always called me his little Michelin man because of my big belly. And somehow I found that really cute. It made me feel loved and beautiful during a time when my body was changing so much. And but let's talk about the mindset before giving birth. Mentally, I actually felt surprisingly calm. I have no idea why. Maybe because I did not have any experience of friends that actually gave birth before. Of course, I had a lot of respect for birth. I knew it was going to be intense and something completely new, but I was not afraid. I was excited. I was generally looking forward to experience this unique moment. I always thought I'm going to bring a life into this world. And honestly, that thought was incredible. I was curious. I wanted to experience it. I wanted to feel it. But at the same time, I was also realistic. I always knew that if the pain became too much, I would immediately choose the epidural. And just knowing that I had this option gave me so much peace. I didn't feel like I had to prove anything. For me, the goal was never to have a perfect birth experience because in my head that was not possible. The goal was to have a positive memory and to meet my baby in the best possible way for myself. But let's go back to the last weeks before birth. They were a little bit mixed. Overall, everything had always been good. My pregnancy was going well. But towards the end, there was one concern. Our baby was simply not growing much anymore. He wasn't gaining much weight. So the doctors here in China are very cautious, sometimes even more cautious than what we were used to in Germany. So because of that, they suggested inducing labor 3 weeks before my due date. But we weren't immediately comfortable with that because we wanted to give him a little bit more time. There was no big danger. So we insisted on waiting a little bit longer. And luckily, he gained a little bit more weight. And after discussing everything together, we finally agreed that we would induce labor on January 13, 1 week before my planned due date. And honestly, I actually liked having the date. Maybe it was a little bit of my German side coming through, but I found it quite charming to have a plan, to know what was going to happen and to be able to prepare. So yeah, but of course we were still nervous. So it was our first pregnancy, our first birth, and we had no idea what to expect. But overall, we felt comfortable with the decision. So I also want to mention some things about the hospital itself and how we ended up in this specific one. So the hospital itself was clear from the beginning. We chose a big international hospital here in Beijing. We already knew several people who had given birth there, and everyone was always extremely happy with their experiences. And honestly, we can say the same. Without exaggeration, we were incredibly happy with the care we received. We are very grateful that we had the opportunity to give birth in a private hospital here in China, thanks to the support from my husband's employer. I think also in the first season we talked about, the healthcare system here. And yeah, it was something we really appreciated. Part 2, the day everything started, labor and birth. So let's go back to January 13, the day we had been waiting for and the day my life changed forever. As I mentioned before, we had planned to induce labor and our appointment was at 12 p.m. We happily prepared everything, packed our bags, enjoyed our last hours as a couple, just the two of us. And then, we got into the taxi. Of course, with that typical little bit of anxiety. Did we forget something? Because suddenly you start wondering if you packed everything you need. So at 12 p.m., we arrived at the hospital, punctually as Germans we are. First, we had to register and then go to the room. And almost immediately after arriving, you will not believe it, my water broke. We just started laughing because, of course, typical German punctuality. We had joked about it already and then it actually happened exactly on time. So the induction we had planned was suddenly completely unnecessary. And I was really happy about that. So I just continued walking around the room and the doctor told me, keep moving, eat something and wait. And then just when I was about to eat my favorite Starbucks muffin, everything changed. Shortly after, the contractions started and they did not start slowly. They did not slowly build up, as I read about it. They came immediately and they came strong. I always imagined labor differently. I thought we would have, you would have contractions, then a break in between where you could breathe, recover, and prepare for the next one. But for me, it wasn't like that. They came and they almost didn't stop. I felt them almost constant. And yeah, it was really painful. So originally, I wanted to try without pain medication. And I wanted to see what my body could do. But I also knew I only wanted to do it as long as I could handle it. So I never wanted to suffer just for the sake of saying I did it without medication. So when I realized the pain was becoming too intense, I decided to get the epidural. And honestly, for me, personally, it was absolutely the right decision. I think I'm quite a sensible person. But after getting the epidural, the doctor told me that I was still not very far along and that it could take quite a while. So she told me to relax, eat something, and maybe even sleep a little bit. So I tried to do exactly that. Around 6 p.m., I started eating the hospital dinner, and then I listened to my husband's amazing labor playlist. You know what I mean? Like the kind of songs you would never expect to hear. Push It, Like a Virgin, The Final Countdown, Hips Don't Lie, and all those funny, energetic songs, and it was hilarious. I was lying there eating, listening to the playlist, feeling a little bit high from the epidural, and just enjoying the moment. And it was actually a really funny and special atmosphere. And then suddenly, just when I finished my dinner, I suddenly felt something between my legs and I wasn't quite sure what was happening. So I asked the doctor if she could check, and she looked, and with a surprised expression on her face, she said, it's starting now. And I was like, what? Now? I was completely overwhelmed. I had just eaten, I was full, and suddenly everything was happening. Within minutes, what felt like a whole football team of nurses and doctors came into my room, and everything became very busy very quickly. At 7 p.m., I started pushing, and honestly, this part is almost impossible to describe. It was such an incredible feeling because I could feel everything happening, but without the pain. I didn't know that this is possible. It was intense, it was exhausting, it was overwhelming, of course, but it was also kind of amazing. I was so grateful for the epidural because I personally cannot imagine having experienced that intensity with the full amount of pain. And I have the biggest respect for every mother who goes through birth without any pain medication. Honestly, those women are incredibly strong. But let's not talk about women, let's talk about my husband. Because in the middle of there was my husband. Normally, he cannot even see blood. We had always joked before, like, what if you faint? Maybe you need the epidural. Because we honestly thought there was a possibility. But he was amazing. He stood next to me. He held my hand. He encouraged me. He supported me so much. And towards the end, when things became really intense, he distracted himself a little bit by taking a video. And I'm actually so grateful that he did, because he captured this once in a lifetime moment. And yeah, I have it here forever. So remember the timeline. Around 2:30, my water broke. Around 4, the stronger contraction started. Around 5, the epidural was finished. At 6, I ate. At 7, I started pushing. And then at 7:38 p.m., our baby was born. And the most beautiful detail, he was born during the song Keep Going. And that moment, there are honestly no words for it. I had tears in my eyes. Everything felt unreal. But at the same time, everything felt exactly right. It was kind of weird. I was exhausted, like completely exhausted. But I also felt this deep, calm happiness, this feeling of peace. They immediately checked him and they helped clear the fluids from his lungs and throat with this small little pump. And then they placed him in my arms and I just stared at him. I was so fascinated that I could barely say anything. I remember thinking, like, this is real. This is our baby. And yeah, in the meantime, they stitched myself because I teared up a little bit. But I really enjoyed this first moment with my baby. But then it was my husband's turn, so they placed the baby on his chest, and when it was time for him to give the baby back, my husband suddenly had no idea how to hold him. He was like, wait, what do I do? And it was such a funny moment because we had absolutely no experience, no idea what we were doing. We were officially parents, but we were still completely beginners. So luckily the nurses were so kind and guided us through everything. They gently cleaned him afterwards and dressed him and gave us time for us. But let's talk about the first breastfeeding moments. I honestly think if some of you are interested, we can dedicate a whole episode to that topic and my learnings, because there were many and I would do so many things differently now. But just let me know if you want to talk about breastfeeding more. But I'll already give you like a glimpse on what I experienced right at the beginning. In general, I was so curious and nervous about breastfeeding. I really hoped it would work because you never know. Earlier that afternoon, the nurses had checked and showed me that I had some colostrum, this thick yellow first milk you have. And I was so relieved. Knowing that my body was already producing something gave me so much confidence. And I thought, okay, somehow this is going to work. And that made me really happy. So right after, cleaning him and explaining us how to do the breastfeeding, I tried. They just latched his mouth at my nipple and I don't know, the little one knew what to do. It was working and I was just grateful because I know not for every mother it's the case that it's starting that easily. But well, let's talk about that topic another day. Let's come to part 3, the first days in the hospital and becoming parents. So after birth, we were completely overwhelmed, as you can imagine, but in the best possible way. We were exhausted, emotional, and happy, of course. And I think it was around 10 p.m. when we were able to move into our new room. There, for the first time, we were really alone as a family. It was just us, our baby, and this completely new reality. We had to let everything sink in. And then it started learning how to be parents. The first days in the hospital were honestly incredibly special. I started my breastfeeding journey and slowly learned how everything worked. The nurses were always there to help us. They changed diapers during the night. They showed us how to handle the baby, how to change diapers, how to take care of him. And from the next day onwards, they really taught us everything step by step. For us as first-time parents, this was such a gift because the truth is you suddenly have this tiny human in your arms and you love him more than anything. But at the same time, you have absolutely no idea what you're doing. We had no experience, no manual, no clue. We were just learning by doing. And having people around us who knew exactly like what they were doing gave us so much confidence. In total, we stayed in the hospital for 4 days, and looking back, those 4 days were incredibly valuable. We had time to recover, we had time to learn, we had time to simply be together, and we received food, we had support, and we didn't have to worry about, the everyday things. And having those 4 days where we were still, surrounded by professionals made us feel safe. We were in good hands. Luckily, everything went really smoothly, besides, the sleep part. But spoiler, still after 18 months, the same. But, breastfeeding worked quite okay at the beginning, till it did not. But as I said, maybe in another episode more to that. Comment it below if you're interested. Yeah, my recovery went well. The wound healing was good. There were no major complications. Overall, everything was much calmer than we had imagined, I would say. But of course, it was still surreal. This feeling of suddenly being a mother, it is almost impossible to describe. It felt strange and completely new, but at the same time, it also felt surprisingly natural. Like somehow my body and my mind already knew what to do. It is such a weird, beautiful, and indescribable feeling. But let's go back to our experiences in the hospital. So the nurses and the midwives were amazing. They checked everything. They showed us how to bath the baby, how to wrap him in a blanket, how to hold him properly, and they answered every single question we had. They also came for follow-up visits after we left the hospital. It was not exactly like in Germany. The support system afterwards is a bit different. It is not as frequent or as personal as some people might know it from Germany, with the midwives that come almost every day in the beginning and like accompany you on the way. But honestly, for us, it was exactly what we needed. They gave us security, they gave us confidence, and they made us feel like we could handle this. So overall, our experiences in the hospital were amazing. Regarding the differences between the pregnancy care in China and Germany, I plan a own episode for that, but I can already say a few things about it. Because we had the private insurance here, the experience was obviously very different from what many people experience in Germany. I cannot compare every single detail because I never gave birth in Germany, but I can explain what my experience was like here. So I had 24/7 support. We had a large family room, as mentioned. There were several nurses and midwives who were constantly available, supporting us and answering questions. Because all the nurses could speak at least some English, communication was okay as well. We could, ask anything without hesitation. Everything was explained. The atmosphere was wonderful. The hospital was clean, calm, peaceful, There was always someone available. The food was also really good. And because we live in China, we had the advantage that we could basically order whatever we wanted at any time. I enjoyed that. Every day I had my Starbucks coffee, I had my cake, smoothies, pizza. So we really allowed ourselves to enjoy this special time. Oh, and my husband could stay with me and slept there on the sofa bed. We were always together. And we really absorbed this intimate time as a new family. It was like in a special little bubble. Sometimes I would look at the baby and think, wait, I am actually a mother now. How did this happen? But at the same time, everything felt, as already mentioned, so natural. It is such a strange combination. Something like completely life-changing, but also something that feels like it was always meant to happen. But of course, the day came when we had to leave, and that was a completely different feeling because the hospital had been our safe place. There were nurses, there were doctors, there were people helping us, and suddenly we were going home, just the three of us. And then, the first car ride was an adventure. We had this baby car seat, the maxi cozy. And honestly, we had no idea how it worked. We were sitting there thinking, okay, we're actually taking this baby home right now. And then we arrived at our apartment, the apartment where before it had always just been the two of us. And suddenly there was this baby and you entered the door. And it was such a crazy feeling because we always joked about it. How crazy is it that people just trust you with this tiny human being? They basically hand you this baby and then you just leave, you go home, and somehow you are expected to figure out how to survive. It sounds funny, but it really is such a crazy transition. You go from being someone's child to suddenly being responsible for someone else's entire life. But, well, it still felt amazing to finally be home, to start our life together, and to slowly discover what our new everyday life looked like as a family. So looking back, I really appreciate how much support we had. My husband was able to stay home for 4 weeks, and we truly allowed ourselves to rest. And at the beginning, life with a newborn is actually still quite manageable in some ways. The baby sleeps a lot, or at least they're supposed to. But you can still, read a book or watch a movie from time to time, sit together, enjoy quiet moments. And yeah, now looking back, I appreciate those moments so much. And I should have enjoyed them a little bit more. But let's come to part 4, looking back, giving birth in China and what I would tell other parents. Looking back today, I can honestly say I would do it exactly the same way again. Would I give birth in China again? Absolutely. But I think the question is not actually about, would you choose China? Because for me, it was not only about the country. I didn't select the country I didn't came to China to make a baby. I think a huge part of my positive experiences came from having a private health insurance, if we're honest, and access to a private international hospital. I cannot say how birth care and postpartum care would have been in Germany because I have never experienced it myself, and I also cannot compare what private care in Germany would look like. But what I can say is with the circumstances we had here, I would definitely choose the exact experience again without hesitation. I felt safe, I felt supported, and I am incredibly grateful that we had this. What would I do differently? Honestly, not much about the birth itself. I feel like everything came together exactly how it was supposed to. The birth was not perfect because everything went exactly according to a plan. It was perfect because I felt supported, because I trusted the people around me, and because in the end we met our baby and my husband was there. But of course, there are many things about other stuff that happened in the last 18 months that I would do different now. And we definitely will talk about them in a future episode, promised. Nevertheless, I already want to give you some advice or just, thoughts for future parents, if you allow me. If I could tell other parents one thing, it would be, don't be afraid. I know how many women are afraid of giving birth and the pain. Just try not to overthink everything. Let things happen. Trust your body. Trust the process. I know it sounds stupid, but somehow everything works out. At the end of the day, the baby usually finds a way to come into the world. And of course, every birth is different, and some have a very painful, traumatic experience. And I'm very sorry for women who have to, or families that have to go through that. Because at the end, every woman is different. Every experience is different. But I think giving yourself permission to accept whatever happens can make such a difference. And for me, having my husband with me was incredibly important. He was not just physically there, he was emotionally there. He held my hand, he encouraged me, he experienced this moment with me and took the video. Don't forget that. Birth is such a huge life event, and sharing it together made it even more special. Oh, and another thing I would recommend, take time for yourself before the baby comes. Enjoy those last moments, these Netflix nights, these calm dinners where you two can eat together. Prepare yourself mentally and physically, because after the baby arrives, everything changes. And while it is beautiful, it is also a completely new chapter and difficult sometimes. And of course, sometimes you will miss the old times. So, to summarize, the time after birth is actually something I would love to talk about in a separate episode. Because honestly, as already mentioned, that chapter deserves its own story. There were many things that I would do differently if I could back now. The postpartum period was not always easy. The sleep deprivation, especially, became something that affected me much more than I expected. Physically, emotionally, mentally. Because of that, the first 12 months were honestly very challenging. There were moments where I felt completely exhausted and reached very difficult mental places. Moment where I wondered how I could continue and survive. And I think this is something that many parents experience, but people do not always talk about it, honestly. So, that's exactly what we will talk about next. In the next episode, I would love to talk more about life after birth, what our everyday life actually looked like, what our biggest challenges were, the highlights, how we handled not having family nearby, how we managed food, breastfeeding, and dividing responsibilities as parents, how our relationship changed, and of course, what happened when my husband had to go back to work, because that was another completely new chapter. Wow, that was long. Thank you so much for listening. I hope that sharing my experience gave you a little bit of insight into what birth in China was like for me. If you have any questions, fears, or your own birth stories you want to share, I would love to hear it from you. Feel free to message me on Instagram at Chasing China. And if you know someone who might benefit from this episode, feel free to share it with them. I would also love if you could leave a comment, tell me your thoughts or share your own experiences. Thank you again for being here, and I'll see you next time for another episode of Chasing China. Bye!